It's your host, Kevin Oldham, back with another episode of Franchise My Business. And this episode has nothing to do with franchising, but it has everything to do with what's helped me become an entrepreneur, what's helped broaden my horizons, and what I hope I'm instilling in my kids as well. And so I know that there's some great lessons here, particularly as you're thinking about, your journey as an entrepreneur. Okay. So I grew up in Topeka, Kansas. I had a great childhood there, and I have a brother who's 7.5 years older than me. And so you think back to the early 80s and skateboarding, what was happening in that industry. People like Tony Hawk, Steve Caballero, all the guys at Pal Peralta started riding boards that were not super skinny, but they were wide, right? And I was probably 7 at that point in time. So let's call it 1982. I picked up a Trans World Skateboarding magazine, and I saw Tony Hawk's skateboard. It's still his very first board that he had, his professional board. And it was really wide. And I was like, man, that's awesome. There was one place in Topeka that sold the new wide skateboards, and it was like a fake bake place. It was a tanning place called Triangles. They sold swimsuits, and then they sold some skateboards, and they were selling complete skateboards for like $200, which, to put that in perspective, that would still be overpriced today. Okay. But they just basically had a monopoly. And I really wanted one of these boards because I was really enjoying skateboarding. I was riding my brother's skateboard, and he had, I looked up to him and all these things. And so I told my parents about this, and somehow we wound up in my mom's Ford Aerostar minivan. We headed to Lenexa, Kansas, suburb of Kansas City. And I remember going to a warehouse and picking up a bunch of skateboards, bringing them back to Topeka. And my parents leased a flea market, basically a booth. They started selling these skateboards. And I was like, that's really cool. Like, my parents solved a problem. And so like that was my first introduction to entrepreneurship. And that company was called Square One Inc. And we were the only skateboard seller in town until we moved to Kansas City when I was 15 years old. So skateboarding kind of introduced me to the concept of solving somebody's problem. Okay. So now I've got my amazing Tony Hawk skateboard, which I still have in my basement today. My very favorite board. I don't ride it anymore. And this is still the 1980s. Well, I'm riding around Topeka. You could ride around the whole town at that point in time. It was very safe, skateboarding around. And I would typically find, because in the 1980s, they put these things called hubcaps on the wheels on cars. And they would fall off all the time. If somebody went around a corner too fast, they go falling off, the curb check, fall off, boom, 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 boom. And so I was out skateboarding throughout town and would randomly find these hubcaps. And I ended up sourcing a guy in downtown Topeka who had basically a used tire and wheel store, and worked out a deal with him. It was a sliding scale where he would buy those hubcaps from me. So my parents helping me get a skateboard that I really wanted, which gave me the power to go around town and skate, ended up giving me this little mental anchor. And I created my very first business, which was basically a hubcap reselling business. And it was super cool too. So like, if I recall, like the Cadillac, the spoked hubcaps, those were like worth $25 to my guy. Okay. He would probably sell them for 50 or whatever. So those were like at the top end. Some of the plastic ones that came on like imports, like Hondas and things like that, they were like $10 or whatever. But that was like tax-free buku dineros for a kid who really just all he did was pick up somebody's trash on the side of the road, drive it over, or wheel it over to this guy, and then walk out with some coins so that I could go to Quick Trip or whatever and get drinks with my buddies. So business ownership, when I started this company like 8 years ago, we were like, oh, you're the first entrepreneur and everything. I'm like, no, I wasn't. My parents were. They planted that seed for me. And then once I got the tool to be able to go around town and like pick up stuff, I was able to create value for somebody else, solve a problem for somebody else. He needed inventory of hubcaps. I needed cash, and it just worked. So I think a lot of times we overcomplicate things. Business is about problem solving and value creation. And, particularly if you're listening to this and you're somebody who's thinking about going into business, a lot of times younger people say, hey, what's the best business to get in and everything like that. I'm like, whichever one you will enjoy, people will pay you for, and you're creating value in excess of the payment that you're getting compensated for. I mean, that's the best business. And that could be picking up trash. My son, he's 11 years old. He's got a couple of houses where he picks up dog poop. Kids making like $30 a week. And he's bought some amazing things with that. He bought his bike. He's bought all sorts of really, really cool things that are giving him that foundation so that he knows that he can go create value and do stuff for people in exchange for compensation. And so that's my journey as an entrepreneur. My very first business was in the automotive industry, in tires and wheels, used hubcaps, and man, it was a simple business. It was a heck of a lot of fun, and sometimes I yearned to going back to something that simple. But what fun would that be? Until next time, I'm your host, and I just have two asks. If you've been listening to the show, I've got two asks. Two. That's it. Like, this is super free. And it's not free for us to do this. I will tell you that. So your payment, number one, if you have somebody who's thinking about starting a business or this episode resonated with them, go ahead and text them a link to this episode right now. Second ask, smash the subscribe button on the platform of choice. And I would deeply appreciate both of those. Until next time, appreciate you. Be well.